Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 2,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
The Minnesota Vikings are in complete meltdown mode, and we're not talking about on-field struggles. We're talking about a behind-the-scenes power struggle that's uglier than a playoff loss. The ownership is calling the shots. The general manager is taking orders. The head coach might be the real GM, and now veteran defenders are publicly trashing the defensive coordinator on social media. This is not a team humming along. This is a franchise in crisis. And if you thought the drama ended after their disappointing playoff run, you've got another thing coming. Buckle up, because the offseason chaos happening right now in Minnesota could define whether this team makes a serious Super Bowl push next year or completely implodes under the weight of its own dysfunction. Let's start with the elephant in the room. The absolute bombshell Kevin Seifert just dropped that's been rattling around my brain for days. In a recent ESPN article, Seifert wrote something that screams incompetence, power struggles, and front office confusion. He said that GM Kwesi Adofo-Mensah made clear his job is to implement the Wolves' team-building philosophy, not his own, and not one that head coach Kevin O'Connell or anyone else conjured. Now, on the surface, that might sound like standard front office speak. But read between the lines for a second. That's not normal. That's not how successful franchises operate. That's what happens when an ownership group doesn't trust their general manager to build a team. That's what happens when you hire a GM and then immediately tell him he's got guardrails, he's got a boss breathing down his neck, and he's implementing someone else's vision. Think about the Los Angeles Rams. Sean McVay and Les Snead have autonomy. Think about the Kansas City Chiefs. Brett Veach is running the show. The Wolves, they're micromanaging. And here's where it gets really interesting. Seifert's quote about the Wolves' team-building philosophy. What does that actually mean? I think it means the ownership is telling Adofo-Mensah one crystal-clear thing. We cannot spend $350 million on the roster again. Last year, the Vikings dropped $350 million on payroll. $350 million. It was a catastrophe. They got a disappointing playoff loss for their troubles. So the Wolves stepped in, looked at the numbers, and said, enough. This year, we're cutting that number down. We're implementing cost controls. We're not going to be reckless anymore. But here's the thing. While they're cutting player payroll, they're simultaneously throwing massive amounts of money at the coaching staff. They gave Brian Flores over $6 million to be the defensive coordinator. Kevin O'Connell is making $18 million as the head coach. That's $24 million locked up in coaching salaries alone. So when Adofo-Mensah is managing the salary cap this offseason, he's not just dealing with players. He's dealing with these astronomical coaching contracts in the background. He's trying to build a competitive roster while the organization is hemorrhaging money on coaches. And the directive from ownership is clear. Get the total payroll down and make it work. But here's where it gets even more interesting, and this is where I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on for a second. And please, take this with a massive grain of salt because this is pure speculation. But I genuinely believe Kevin O'Connell is the real general manager of the Minnesota Vikings right now. I think Adofo-Mensah is the cap guy. He's the salary cap engineer. He's the guy implementing the Wolves' dictates and trying to make the numbers work on a spreadsheet. But when it comes to personnel decisions on the offensive side of the ball, I think O'Connell has final say. And I think Brian Flores has significant power on the defensive side. So you've got this two-headed monster at the top, O'Connell and Flores, each wielding influence over their respective sides of the ball, and Adofo-Mensah is stuck in the middle, trying to make everyone happy while also respecting the Wolves' salary cap mandates. It's a recipe for dysfunction, frankly. It's not a clean power structure. It's not clear who's actually calling the shots. And that ambiguity leads to exactly what we're seeing right now. Chaos, confusion, and veteran players getting cut while taking on dead money because nobody wants to take full responsibility for these moves. This is what makes that Seifert comment so damning. He's essentially asking the question, is Adofo-Mensah cleaning up messes made by others, or is he building the foundation for his own tenure as GM? Because if he's just the cleanup guy, if he's just the cap manager implementing other people's vision, then he might get fired after 1 year when someone else wants to come in and put their stamp on the roster. If he's building for the future, then he might stick around. The answer will become clear later this spring, Seifert wrote. And that's ominous. That's the sound of a beat writer who's noticed something is seriously wrong with the organizational structure. Now let's talk about Harrison Smith because this is genuinely fascinating. The veteran safety has been the face of this franchise for over a decade. He's a leader, a Pro Bowler, a captain, the kind of guy you want in your locker room no matter what. Most of us assumed he was retiring. He had a down year by his standards. He's in his late 30s. It felt like the natural time to ride off into the sunset. But Alec Lewis, the excellent Vikings reporter for The Athletic, just reported something shocking. It's actually up in the air whether Harrison Smith retires. He might come back. And the determining factor, according to Lewis, is the quarterback situation. If the Vikings can get to a place where they create real buying among the locker room about the quarterback plan, if players actually believe in the direction, then Harrison Smith could be convinced to return for another year. That's a big if in Minnesota right now. Think about what that tells us. Harrison Smith doesn't care about money. He doesn't care about stats. He doesn't care about his individual legacy. What matters to him is whether he believes in the team's future. He wants to know if the Vikings have a plan at quarterback, if that plan makes sense, and if the locker room is unified around it. That's the sign of a true leader, and it's also the sign of a franchise that's desperate. If your veteran cornerstone guy is hedging on retirement based on the quarterback situation, you've got serious questions at that most important position. Now, should the Vikings bring Harrison Smith back? From a sentimental perspective, absolutely. Number 22 is a legend. He's been the backbone of this defense for years. He's the kind of guy you want around younger players. But from a pure football perspective, let's be honest. At 37 years old, he can't be an every-down player anymore. He just can't. The game has evolved. The speed has increased. The athleticism required is different now. Harrison Smith is a step slower than he was 5 years ago. You can see it on tape. What he can still do, though, is play situational football. He was absolutely dominant in the second half of last season. He was incredible against the Lions. One of the best performances of his entire career. He's still smart, still instinctive, still knows how to disguise coverages for Brian Flores' complex defense. And here's the thing, with Van Ginkel lined up next to him on the line of scrimmage, they can create absolute chaos for opposing offenses. You don't know if they're blitzing, you don't know if they're dropping back. It's a chess piece that Flores absolutely loves. The perfect role for Harrison Smith would be a limited snap count. Maybe he plays 30% of snaps. Maybe he's a third down specialist. Maybe when the Vikings want to bring the exotic look, they slide him down on the line and create that beautiful confusion that Flores orchestrates so well. Harrison Smith returning as a designated weapon rather than a full-time player. That's the move. That's how you extend his career while also respecting the reality that he can't be a safety in coverage for 60 snaps a game anymore. Bring him back, use him strategically, let him be a mentor, and get some production out of those limited reps. That's the smart play. But again, it all hinges on whether he believes in the quarterback situation. And speaking of dysfunction, let's get to the nuclear explosion that just happened on social media. Javon Hargrave was released by the Vikings after a disappointing tenure, and he did not go quietly into the night. He didn't issue some classy statement about being grateful for the opportunity. He didn't thank the organization. Instead, he went on Twitter and essentially called out Brian Flores, the defensive coordinator who orchestrated one of the most successful defenses in franchise history this past year. Now, Hargrave didn't explicitly name Flores, but the insinuation is crystal clear. If you're a defensive lineman who wants to rack up sacks and pile up statistics, Flores' system is not for you. That's a direct shot at the defensive philosophy, and it's coming from a guy who just got cut. Here's the thing about Brian Flores' defensive system that a lot of people don't understand. It's not designed to make individual defensive linemen look good. It's not a system where you're getting 10, 11, 12 sacks a year as a defensive tackle. It's a system where you're doing the dirty work. You're setting edges. You're creating lanes for your edge rushers. You're playing your gap. You're doing things that don't show up on the stat sheet, but absolutely show up in the win column. It's a scheme where you have to check your ego at the door, and not every player is built for that. Some guys want their names in the box score, they want sack numbers, they want to be able to point to individual production and say, look what I did. In Flores' scheme, you might do the work that allows your edge rusher to get the sack, but you don't get credit for it. You get credit from your coaches, from your teammates, from people who actually understand football. But you don't get credit from PFF. You don't get contract leverage. You don't get the spotlight. Remember back when Harrison Phillips was still with the Vikings and he talked about his initial skepticism of the Flores system? He said something really telling. He said his selfish initial thoughts weren't super high. It sounded like there wasn't going to be a lot of production through the system. It sounded like they were just going to ask him to be an edge setter, a cutback player, fill niche roles. But then he saw what it did to opposing offenses in practice. He saw the problems it created. He saw the results. And suddenly, his perspective changed. He bought in, and the Vikings defense went crazy. But not every player has that maturity. Not every player can put the team first. Javon Hargrave clearly couldn't. And look, I'm not going to defend the Hargrave signing or the Jonathan Allen signing in the first place. Those were disasters. They were mistakes. The Vikings thought they were adding veteran presence and production on the defensive line, and instead, they got guys who didn't fit the system and ultimately didn't contribute. But I'll tell you what was even worse than those signings: the Harrison Phillips trade. The Vikings traded a legitimately elite run stopper, a guy who was one of the best at his position, for 2 sixth-round picks. That was a mistake. Phillips still had plenty of gas in the tank. He went to the Jets and had a solid year. The Vikings got nothing of value in return. That's on the front office. That's a move that haunts this organization right now, because if the Vikings still had Harrison Phillips, they wouldn't be scrambling to find competent defensive tackles. They wouldn't have had to sign Hargrave and Allen in desperation moves. They'd have a foundation on the interior line. The reality is this: the Vikings absolutely botched the defensive tackle position in free agency. Badly. If it weren't for Jalen Redmond, who's become one of the most dynamic young defensive linemen in football, this unit would be an absolute shambles. The interior line would be Levi Drake Rodriguez, who's a rotational guy, not a star. It would be Taron Ingram Dawkins, who's another rotational player. It would be Elijah Williams. It would be a bunch of guys playing musical chairs and hoping for the best. Thank God they have Jalen Redmond, because without him, we'd be sitting here talking about the Vikings needing to draft defensive tackles in the first, second, and third rounds next year. The position group is that depleted. So what does Hargrave calling out the system actually do? It poisons the well. It gives other defensive linemen pause. During free agency meetings, when Vikings scouts and coaches are trying to recruit players, what happens when that player's agent says, "You know, I've got to ask about the system. I've got concerns"? It makes the pitch harder. It adds doubt. And in a league where players have choices, where free agency is king, that's poison. You want your coaching staff and your system to have credibility with players. You want guys to want to play for Brian Flores, not to fear or resent him. Hargrave's comments undermine that. But here's where we need to come back to the bigger picture. All of this dysfunction, the power struggle between ownership and front office, the questions about Kevin O'Connell's actual authority, the defensive line disasters, the veteran players publicly criticizing the system, Harrison Smith hedging on retirement, it all points to an organization that's not firing on all cylinders. It's an organization where clarity of purpose is lacking. It's an organization where multiple people have power, but nobody has full responsibility. And in the NFL, that's a recipe for disaster. The Wolves seem to think that throwing money at this problem is the answer. They hired an expensive head coach. They made Brian Flores the highest-paid coordinator in the league. They've assembled talented pieces on the offensive side of the ball, but they're not aligned on the overall direction. They're not united in their vision, and that lack of unity is showing in the personnel decisions, in the free agent signings, in the trades, in everything. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is caught in the middle, trying to manage a salary cap that's bursting at the seams while also trying to respect the different power centers within the organization. It's an impossible job. Will Harrison Smith come back? It depends on what happens at quarterback. Will the Vikings find answers on the interior defensive line? It depends on whether they can convince experienced players to buy into the Flores system. Will this team return to the playoffs next season? It depends on whether they can get organizational alignment before it's too late. These are the questions that will define the 2024 Vikings season. And right now, there are way more question marks than exclamation points in Minnesota. This offseason has revealed a lot about the Minnesota Vikings. It's revealed a franchise that's searching for identity. It's revealed leadership that's not perfectly aligned. It's revealed personnel decisions that haven't always been stellar. But it's also revealed opportunities. If the Vikings can get everyone on the same page, if they can make clear decisions about the direction of this team, if they can convince the locker room, guys like Harrison Smith, that there's a real plan here, then maybe they turn it around. But that window is closing fast. Every week of this offseason, every player that leaves, every awkward statement on social media is adding to the narrative that something is broken in Minnesota. And in a league where perception is everything, that's dangerous. So here's what we're looking for as we head into the rest of the offseason. We're looking for clarity from ownership about the direction of the team. We're looking for evidence that Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores are fully aligned on their philosophies. We're looking for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah to make smart moves that set the organization up for success, not just moves that look good on a spreadsheet. We're looking for Harrison Smith to decide that he believes in this team's future enough to come back for one more year. And we're looking for the narrative around this team to shift from dysfunction to direction. Because right now, the Minnesota Vikings are one of the messiest organizations in football, and if they don't clean it up soon, it's going to be a long year in Minnesota. So if you want to see the Vikings get back to the playoffs next season, if you want them to figure out their front office dysfunction and get aligned as an organization, smash that like button. Let's see if we can hit 300 likes on this one. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on the Harrison Smith situation and the Javon Hargrave controversy. And if you're not subscribed to this channel yet, please hit that subscribe button because we're breaking down all the Vikings drama as it happens. The Wolves are pulling the strings behind the scenes, and we're here to expose every bit of dysfunction and drama as it unfolds. So stick with us as we navigate the wildest offseason in Minnesota Vikings history. We'll be right here breaking it all down for you. Let's go Vikings fans.
Hey
We've
everyone,
got a long
I'm
road
working
ahead
to
of
hit
us
2,000
this
subscribers
offseason.
and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now.